What's up, everybody?
Hey, what's up, familia? You know you just arrived to Deepen's Yes and. Word on the street is that some people are here to learn, some people are here to have fun. At the end of the day, we are here to share ideas. I'm Dice. I'm going to be your moderator. You'll think of me as like a chat bot kind of. If you want to get your comments out there, feel free to hit me up, DM me in the messaging module we have here. How we all feeling? I see Christina's ready. I know that. Imari's up in here. Okay, Kenzie. Okay, Kenzie, our Canadian homegirl. I love to see it. Oh, we got Alyssa from NYC. What's up, Melissa? Melissa, I see you got a little recording studio. Idris got the big headphones on. You gonna hear us loud and clear.
We got Idris
All right,
Elba in the
well, I'm
building. Oh,
excited to
snap.
have y'all. Make sure to put your Instagram name in your tag under here, just like I have it, just like you might see some of the guests have it, just so we can connect afterwards if you feel like it. We're only going to give you some airtime if you got your video on. So make sure to click that bad boy. Don't worry, the NSA is not in on this call. And on that note, I'm gonna transition it to my brother Amari. What's going on?
On that note, am I like plugged into the NSA? What's up, everybody? What's cracking? What's popping? What's happening? Hi, everybody. This is just gonna be a quick little note for the people who don't know what the hell they just signed up for. I'll just introduce you into the intention of this space. The intention of this space is that, as far as I can tell, we are all human beings living in the year 2020, and in the year 2020, it's very difficult to have a thought-provoking conversation because it's politically incorrect, it's taboo, it's offensive, it's hurtful, it's so mean. But I think that if we don't have these kind of conversations, then we're not going to progress. We're definitely not going to evolve as fast as we could. And what I also really enjoy is that these conversations don't have to be scary. These conversations can actually be fucking hilarious. And that's my intention coming into the space. For the people who know me, they probably know me as their funniest friend. I know Kayla feels that way. Alyssa probably feels that way. Thanks, Kayla. I'm super excited to see some people from Australia. Shout out to Jen. Kayla's down the street, so it's not as exciting. But regardless, Yes and is a show in which we posit an interesting question for every episode, a question that maybe you're not allowed to discuss at your local coffee shop, but has been burning on your chest for a minute. And not only do we bring on these questions, we also bring on people who are willing to conversate and people who are well-versed in dialogue and in the process of expanding their opinions and expanding their perspectives. So tonight we have two very special guests, but I will introduce them in just a minute, because before we do that, I need us to set the space. I need us to come to a certain agreement. So Dr. Dice, could you pull up our yes and blood oaths? Now, everybody watching, if you could raise for me your right hand and repeat after me. You're agreeing to these things, all the terms and conditions we're in, okay? Number one, I will not take myself or my opinions too seriously. Number two, I give myself permission to be wrong. Chances are that I probably am. That one doesn't apply to me, it applies to you guys. Number three, I take full responsibility for any discomfort that I experience. And number four, I will not hold Yes and or its affiliates liable for any growth or transformation I experience while attending the show. And number five, I will laugh hard at any and all of Imari's jokes. So far, I think we're good. I see Melissa has a rather straight face, so I'm going to need somebody to go ahead and get that taken care of. What's up, Daddy? Everybody wave to my dad. He's in here. He's going to be upset in 45 minutes when he realizes how much I cuss during these things. Okay, cool. So what's going to happen tonight is that we have two very special guests who are going to co-facilitate this conversation with me. But not only do we have these two special guests, we also have you, because the whole point of this is not so you all watch three people have a conversation amongst themselves, but it's that you interact and we make it an interactive experience. So while we're talking about all these sensitive subjects, if you feel something on your chest that you need to get off, you have permission to step into this space and offer your opinion into the pot. That young, handsome man that you met just a minute ago, he will be the person reading through the chat to see if anybody is interested in coming into the conversation, and he will send you a message and invite you into the chat. At which point you will have 1 minute to speak your opinion and 1 minute only. Cool? Thumbs up if that makes sense. Thumbs down if it doesn't make sense. Hey, Kelly, welcome to the party. You're always so excited. I love it. Fantastic. Okay, so given all that, my co-conspirators in this endeavor, the wonderful Kaysha King and the illustrious Troy, are going to be joining me in this dialogue journey of dialogues. And in order to introduce them, I'm going to ask them both a question. Kaysha, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. Kaysha, we're talking about cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation tonight. What makes you passionate about this subject? Why do you want to talk about it?
Well, first and foremost, not just because of this particular subject, but just because of what you initially said has always resonated with me as someone who leads adult learning. And that's what I've always studied, which is the idea that we grow most through dialogue and that we have to be willing to have open, difficult conversations because our purpose in being on earth is to grow. And the only way that we do that is with each other through understanding, through realizing that we're wrong. And so for me, this conversation is something that I think about often. It's something that I've experienced, whether that be through things with my hair or things that I've not been allowed to do that I can see other people being allowed to do and it's considered cool. And so just having those experiences in life where I've had my culture not be okay for me to do, but had it be okay and cool for other people to do really makes me interested in this conversation.
Cool. Side note, your hair looks fantastic today.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Troy Casey, how you feeling, brother? What's your thoughts? Why are you here? Why are you passionate about having this conversation? You have some stiff competition in Miss Kaysha King. You're on mute, by the way. Still on mute. Can anybody read lips? All right, good.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel great. Thanks for asking. And I'm just stimulated by human consciousness and evolving. And I think this is a great time to talk about basically anything. And so, I like to get down to the root of all of our, problems that are holding us back as a species or me as myself, right? And so this dialogue is great.
Cool. I surely hope so. Fantastic, amazing. These are going to be my co-conspirators in this endeavor. Like I said, if at any point anybody says anything that interests you, that makes you want to submit anything into the chat, feel free to let Dice know or just have a conversation in the chat and we'll check it out. Sound good? Fantastic. So to get us started, Troy, I'm going to throw the ball to you. Okay? My question to you, my friend, is do you think that there is such thing as cultural appropriation?
I definitely see it out there, and I've traveled the world extensively, and I like to watch YouTube videos as well. And I traveled to Japan, and there's a group, and I think they're Instagrammers as well, where they totally copy the Cholo style. Now it's respected because they give respect where all respect is due, or maybe it's respected because I don't know, maybe it's not as a threat, but I've never saw like real, and that's true cultural appropriation, right? They get the lowriders, they get the whole thing. And so, but I see things, from my perspective, I like to come from the perspective of appreciation and try to understand people. Now, we also have the parameter, because let's define our parameters. So if you actually steal from someone, intellectual property rights, and there's tons of lawsuits in Hollywood and LA just for ideas. I think it's there. It just seems to be very blurred lines, and many things from foods for example, the kimchi or the sauerkraut from the German culture or the Korean culture. I think those are gifts to humanity, and they're so amazing. Am I appropriating it because I bring it into my YouTube videos and talk about how beneficial it is for, I don't know, my wife's Korean, so I always give it up to the source. That's the type of guy I am. And so, but I guess, for me, it really comes down to, let's define our parameters. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good point. I think that's come up on Yes and before, which is this idea of languaging, right? Because the way one person uses one word isn't always how another person is going to use one word. And where we screw up is when we get mad at people for not subscribing to the way that we're using one word. It's a terrible circle, in my opinion. But I think you bring up a good point, Troy, when you introduce this concept of blurred lines, right? Like, because it's not very clear what is cultural appropriation versus what is cultural appreciation, then it just becomes very subjective. And then we just say, oh, I don't like that person, so now I'm going to say that they're appropriating. That's what I can see happening in social media often, which I don't think takes us anywhere. What do you think, Kaysha?
And I like to point out, how the brain works. I looked some things up. There were some things that I wanted to cover in this discussion as well. First of all, defining appreciation and appropriation. But when I started looking up how the brain, works and what we associate with, it made a very good point. The limbic brain is the seat of value judgments that we make often unconsciously that exert such a strong influence on our behavior. And the reason I say that is because my wife and a lot of my colleagues specialize in hypnosis and doing, deep mental work. And then it says the neocortex is the flexible and has the most infinite learning abilities. The neocortex is also what has enabled human cultures to develop, right? So our cultural elements are right inside of our own brain. And so we're defining our parameters of what culture actually is. And the definition of culture is relating to the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a society. So I think this conversation is great because we are creating culture right in front of us, whether we like it or not, or realize it or not. Appreciation is the recognition and enjoyment of the good qualities of someone or something. That's basically, at least one of my golden rules. I like to just roll around town finding the good qualities of people, because let me tell you, there's two forces on this planet: yin and yang, shadow and light, masculine, feminine, inclusion, exclusion, inhalation, exhalation. So, what do you choose to focus on? Not being a Pollyanna and act like our problems don't exist, but also, not acting like a tyrant and holding everyone hostage to our own ideas. Somewhere in the middle, finding that middle path, as all the ancient sages have said, so you can walk in that neutral possibility. Because let's face it, the world doesn't always show up the way we have it in our mind. In fact, my meditation teacher used to talk extensively about that. We react to things that happen in life that we don't want, and then we are craving other things in our lives that either happen or don't happen, and then are dismay and upset from that. So that, to me, is at the root of the defilement of mankind in general, right? What is it that we're so attached to or averse to? And can we be neutral in the face of that? So for me, this is always a high vibrational conversation, to go to the penultimate, or go to the root of our problems, and then start having conversations about our solutions. So again, back to the parameters. What are we talking about? I got a Wu-Tang shirt on. Am I a bad guy for wearing that? Or do I just love the RZA and the ODB, till death do I come, right? Am I appropriating because of that? I mean, like, where are our sensitivities and our sensibilities? And so where do we define that? So that's my
Kaysha,
question.
what do you think?
Actually, I want to comment on two things. One, the idea that there are these blurred lines, right? And we have these blurred lines because we don't start with a definition. And for me, when I think about first of all, I think cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation both exist. And that, again, they exist because there's that fine line in between the two. So when I think about cultural appropriation, for me, it's the erasure of a culture through the commercialization of whether that be garments or that be music, without acknowledgement for the culture that it comes from. So when I hear Troy say, he loves kimchi, and he always makes sure that he's paying homage to the fact that he learned this from his Korean wife or from his travels. He's paying homage to the culture from which this came. That is cultural appreciation, right? But when it's cultural appropriation is when you don't give that homage, when you don't acknowledge that this came from someone else's culture. And then you utilize that for the benefit. To me, cultural appropriation involves economics. There's some way that people are capitalizing on another person's culture without actually giving any homage to the fact that people worked hard to create this and that it has some level of meaning within their culture. The other thing that I want to comment on is the idea of, well, when we appreciate something, that we take what we appreciate, we take what we like. But to me, we have to be very careful, because what cultural appropriation also means is that we take aspects of a minority culture that fit within the dominant culture. We're taking only the pieces that we like. and saying, okay, this part of this culture is acceptable, while these other parts of this culture are not acceptable, right? And so I think that we have to be very clear with what cultural appreciation is versus cultural appropriation.
I love that. That was a whole thesis statement. Thank you, Kaysha. That's fantastic. So people who know me know that I like to play in the middle ground. I like to play in the devil's advocate role. I never really like to take a side. So when I hear you talk, Kaysha, and this idea of cultural appropriation is when you don't pay homage, right? But appreciation is when you do pay homage, right? I think that, what about in the gray area? Like, does that necessarily mean like every time somebody dresses in a certain way, every time somebody listens to a certain kind of music, they have to have like a disclaimer, if they have to hold around like a contract, right? Because of course that's just mentally exhausting, right? Like a white person with dreads now has to carry around like an identification card that says like, I appreciate the fact that I'm wearing dreads, right? Like at what point does it do we have to continuously be doing that?
I think it's in the dialogue, right? In the exact dialogue that we're having right now. And to the point that I forget who made it, I've been watching the chats pop up, but someone was making the point of not wanting to be beholden to one specific culture, but wanting to be able to pull various aspects of culture. And for me, when I see a white person with locks, it really becomes about, first of all, I don't know this person. So I don't know what their experiences have been. I know white people with locks who are from Jamaica, who are far more Rastafarian than I've ever been in my life. And I used to have locks, right? And so it becomes about really checking our value systems and the way that we put our opinions of situations on other people without understanding the context for that person. And so, no, you don't have to carry around a contract that says, or a little, identification card that says, hey, I am not a cultural appropriator because I studied the history of X, Y, and Z, and I am paying homage to this person by doing that. But I think if we engage in dialogue with someone around these things and they aren't willing to acknowledge the culture from which it came, that is when it becomes cultural appropriation.
Beautiful. Absolutely fantastic. Dice, I think he said that he has somebody who wanted to jump into the call.
That's right. So we got some real crazy thoughts popping off right now. At Mind Love Melissa made this great comparison of pulling from culture to open source software, and I would love to hear more.
Yeah. I've just always wondered, and I know that I'm not a minority, so I don't have that feeling of like, oh, it's being taken from me. It doesn't really happen that often when you're here. It's normally the other way around. But I think to like open source software and how much that has really benefited tech and like the internet and whatever, because it's free to take, adapt, and build upon. And so it's like, what if everything in life were like that? Where is the line of that? Like I look at yoga, which is something that's greatly changed my life. And a lot of people have the argument that yoga itself is culture appropriation. And one of the arguments has been, well, especially this certain kind of yoga. And that certain kind of yoga, the one that's modernized it, was the one that got me into yoga in the first place. It was what made it interesting to me at a time that I wasn't ready for all of the other stuff. And then what happened is I was introduced to this modern American way of I think I lost myself, but of doing this. And then I started to absorb the other teachings. And then I started to get curious about that culture. And then I took yoga teacher training and I learned all the stuff about where it actually came from. And so it was a good gateway into this other idea, into these other ideas.
Ooh, she got the axe.
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate you. Yeah, and I'm gonna toss that off to you, Troy, and I want to hear what you have to say to that. But I think you bring up a good point, which is this idea of like, at what point does it become proprietary, right? Like, oh, only Black people can do that, right? And then at that point, I think that we all suffer, right? Because kind of like what Melissa is saying, it's like when you have open source software culture, we can coin that, it's clever, open source culture, all of a sudden you can be like, oh, I'm going to take this idea and now I'm going to add upon it. And we as a culture can grow, right? Like when the kids in Japan take hip hop culture and then they start to make little raps and it's like, oh shit, now we haven't even experienced somebody rapping in this kind of scheme before, but it's because they've learned it from Black hip hop culture. Does that make sense? So at what point are we, because I as a a Black guy, right? I've seen times where people are like, oh no, they can't do the things that we do. But why? Right? At what point are we all like, at what point does ownership become selfish?
Well, you know, I think, Imani, I've been talking about this for a long time. And Einstein said you can't solve a problem at the same level of mind that created it. I believe that there's a lot of division and competition inside of us when we're much better cooperating amongst each other. And that division, the root of the division that I've been able to understand comes from our central banking fiat currency debt slave system. So people are divide and conquer. I do believe in open source blueprinting, which is coming up right around the corner. I think SpaceX is already doing it. You know, besides inventions, you know, nothing's new under the sun. The Taoists, the yogis figured out a lot of this stuff. And then it's just been an evolution of artistry, you know, since then. And so my point is for us to evolve, I think we got to get the money, which was another part of this conversation, the economics, the lawyering, the you know, all who can make money over it. Because let's face it, we were talking about hip hop earlier. I brought it up. You know, who made the most money off of that? You know, let's face it. So I believe that we have to iron our problems out as a species, as a whole. We are required to upgrade beyond the petrodollar and the oil that we are killing other people on this planet for. Those are the two things that I've found as the roots. The economics are there. I believe in open source blueprinting. I don't think anything's new under the sun. People tell me, oh, I look like Wim Hof and I do breath work and, you know, I copied him. Oh, whatever. Okay, I love Wim. And I guarantee when we meet, we're going to high five. And we're not even going to talk about it. We're just two dudes that breathe because we're having problems with our family, right? And so I just think that I'd like to use this conversation about the evolution and going forward. And yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. Let's get rid of money. Go to the gift economy. The Zulu nation from South Africa calls it Ubuntu. Ubuntu means contributionism, where we're cooperating, which is in alignment with the laws of biomimicry and how organisms organize and flourish. And I think that's where we're at right now. And again, a lot of these conversations are steeped in, hey, somebody's not getting paid and they invented it, you know? And again, I like giving props where props are due, but who can tell me the guy that invented the wheel, right? When was the last time you high-fived them mentally before you got in your car or on your bicycle?
Fair point. I don't think about it when I get in my car. Kaysha, what do you think?
So I'm still laughing about the wheel. I think that we have to be careful that we don't get into a position where we are not talking about the reality of what life is like right now. And the reality and I'll speak as an African woman, the reality for African people is that we are not in a position of power in this world right now. And a lot of that has come from the fact that we have not been able to monetize, because the reality is we live in a world where money matters. Now, if we didn't, I wish that we didn't. I absolutely wish that we didn't. I've spent time living in South Africa with the Zulu tribe. So I know what Ubuntu is, and I've seen it in action. I've seen it work, but we don't live in that in the Western world. And so the reality is that when you start to talk about power, because power is the true dynamic here, right? It's not necessarily about money, it's that money represents power. And when we start to talk about power, we realize that when you steal the ability for people to take care of themselves, to take care of their children, to have and to be what they desire to have and to be, and that is the reality that we live in this society, is that money is the way that those things happen. Money gives us the freedom to have these opinions. Money gives me the freedom to be able to sit here right now and have this dialogue with you. And when we if we try to take away money from the conversation, we're not talking about the reality of what we live in. We're talking about a theoretical reality, which, again, Troy, I would be super happy to live in. I'm noticing that my glasses are crooked and I'm trying to fix them. It's not working. So I think we have to be careful about living in the reality of what we're living in. And when we talk about cultural appropriation, what we're really saying is there was something that we created that we are now not allowed to take care of ourselves utilizing. And that is problematic.
Is there some examples that you can give for that?
Oh, absolutely. I can give, you mentioned Eminem. And so I will take it to Eminem. And
I
will
didn't
tell
mention
you
Eminem. I mentioned
that
hip hop.
you mentioned hip hop. So that's the first person I think of. So maybe because you said hip hop and white, I thought Eminem. Maybe that's my own issue, right? Because we've all got them. But so thank you for the clarification. But
Your
when
limbic system.
When I think, exactly, it's my limbic system. When I think about Eminem, I just had this conversation with my 21-year-old nephew when I was back east last week. And he got all up in arms because I was like, oh, Eminem's a cultural appropriator. And he and I had this conversation for like 30 minutes. And he said, well, I don't think about that kind of thing. I just really like Eminem. But the reality is that if you listen to even Eminem's lyrics, he himself admits that the only reason, he has a lyric in one of his songs, the song is called White America. And the lyric, I might butcher it, any of you are Eminem fans, please feel free to correct me. But the lyric says something like, look at my sales, if I was Black, I would have sold half. So he is thereby acknowledging that he took something that belonged to someone else and was able to capitalize on it because he was not a part of that minority culture.
But what belonged to who?
Hip hop.
Belonged to who?
It belonged to Black culture.
Black?
Yes, Black African culture. It belonged in New York. That's where hip hop started, right? And so when we look at the history of that, and
I know Justin Bieber. He's Puerto Rican, and he's got all sorts of mixes up in him too. So I didn't know that hip hop was Black.
It wasn't white culture. Let's just say that. So we'll say it was the culture of people of color. It was not white culture.
I'll have to ask Justin. He was there.
Ask him. Ask him. But when we talk about, someone's typing about the Beastie Boys, right? But when we think about, so you're asking for examples. So when we think about, when people think about hip hop and we think about Eminem, right? We see that people have been able to capitalize on things. We think about the history of things like cornrows, right? This is what people always want to come to when we talk about cultural appropriation, right? We want to talk about cornrows. So when we talk about cornrows.
Does Eminem have as much loot as P. Diddy or Jay-Z? Those guys
I don't think that's what we're talking about, though. And they're not making all of their money from hip hop. They have clothing lines. They have perfumes and colognes. They have all sorts of other means of making money from their celebrity. Right? So that's not where they made Jay-Z didn't make the bulk of his money in hip hop. He made the bulk of his money commodifying himself. So I think that's talking about something a little bit different. But we can even take it, like I was saying, to something like cornrows, right? When I grew up, I was not allowed to wear cornrows. And the reason why I was not allowed to wear cornrows is because going into professional environments, they were seen as urban and ghetto, right? But now I see white women wearing cornrows all the time. And the term urban, which used to be something really derogatory, now actually means something cool. And so I see women who are not of African culture wearing cornrows, which we were not allowed to wear, even though we started cornrows and we actually used them. The cultural significance behind cornrows was not just a style, right? It was actually, cornrows started because we were using them to trace and create maps for how to escape slavery. Right, for how to escape enslavement, not just in North America, but in South America as well, and throughout the Caribbean. We were using these as methods. Wow. Yeah. So then that's why people like myself and other Black people are offended by these types of things, because we don't dig into the history of how these things started and how they were culturally significant for a people. Right? Cornrows were culturally significant. We used these to escape slavery. And then we were told we couldn't wear them because they were ghetto. And then suddenly the dominant culture decided that it was cute and cool. And now everybody's wearing them without understanding the cultural significance.
Right. I understand where you're coming from. And, in my work, I do a lot of men's work, especially. Carrying that type of burden with you of being offended by stuff like that, it's going to weigh you down and slow you down for success. I mean, for every example that you can show me that somebody's offended, we could probably show you examples of people who succeeded in the same position. So carrying the you know, I'm triggered, I'm offended. This is a cross that we bear. And again, let's go back to how the brain works. It's in the limbic system where we, you know, our nervous system is myelinate as we develop from the culture that we live in. And so ideally, we want to be able to see out of it. We want to be free, right? We want to be liberated. And so do we really need to bear that cross? Or can we let that go and get bigger fish to fry is my thing.
So let me ask you a question, Troy. So when you just think about what you just said around, hey, I didn't even realize that that was the history of cornrows. If you...
That's dope. That's super dope.
Right. But so if you were to, and I know this is like, I'm not going to judge it. So if you were to put yourself into a position of someone who has had their culture stolen, right? And what I'm saying is, people who know me know I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky person. I can have this knowledge and not bear it as a burden. To me, intellect and knowing my history is not a burden. Understanding the cultural significance is not a burden to me, right? That's actually something I take pride in. When I didn't know that, I didn't wear cornrows. When I learned that, I started wearing cornrows. Because the burden is not in the knowing. The burden is in the not knowing. The burden is in the not acknowledging. And that to me is where cultural appropriation starts. When as a person of color, you don't have pride. You are not able to be proud of who you are and who you see your people as, because there's all this judgment from the dominant society. And then you begin to learn your culture. That is privilege, right? Learning and knowing is power. Learning and knowing is not a burden. I'm not burdened by the fact that I know that my ancestors invented cornrows so that they could escape slavery. I'm proud of that because that means we were smart. We were able to outsmart our captors.
Right. But what I'm talking about is the level of frustration or aggravation.
I don't speak for those people. I don't know. I'm not frustrated. I'm not aggravated. But what I am saying is that we have to acknowledge where these things come from. And we have to acknowledge, we have to have knowledge. We have to acknowledge knowledge, right? And does that sound anything like, we have to acknowledge that having knowledge is in fact power, right?
Well,
and
all knowledge,
I think it's separate from being angry about that knowledge.
If I
ultimately,
may, I have a
all
thing I want to
knowledge
jump
is
in right
knowledge
here.
of self. All
So I want to
knowledge
jump in
is
real quick,
knowledge
Troy.
of self.
So one thing that Kaysha, that you brought up earlier that really stuck out to me that I hadn't really considered before, but completely makes sense, is this idea of economics, right? So I think just to ground it in, to kind of like step us away from race for a second, if everybody here was in a company and they came up with an idea and that idea was popping, but then your coworker took off with the idea and he got paid for it, and then you weren't getting paid, that'd be kind of bullshit, right? Regardless of what race you are, it's kind of bullshit,
Legal too.
right? Yeah. So I think that's what we're talking about, right? This idea of like, oh, okay, cool. If I have an idea, can I benefit off of it, right? But if we start to see a trend where it's like, I can't benefit off of it, and these people are benefiting off of it, I don't really care what color they are. I just want my coin. I just want my bread, right?
Well,
and I think, go ahead.
You know, I'd like to bring up the point. You know, my mentor created a fitness program. Tarzan and Jane, two bodies are very different. He went through his copyright lawyer, you know, got it all ironed out, paid a copyright attorney a lot of money. Years later, Disney came after them because they owned Tarzan. And my mentor was like, we hired enough people. It's like, fuck Disney. And you know, he said, no, that's not the way it works. Submit, pay all your lawyer fees now, or they will crush you. So he had to be like, did he want to be right? Or did he want to continue on his business type of thing? And that is where these economics come in and just squash out your whole idea of whatever you think is yours. Does that make sense? I mean, this is the world we live in.
Kaysha? You're on mute. You're on mute, but I can tell you're saying something amazing.
It's this whole thing of entitlement, you know. It's like whatever we think we're entitled to. But if we don't pay attention to the reality that's there, or things are shifting, then it's only us that's going to get hurt. The individuals that are bearing that cross and that burden.
So I think it's not just the individual that's hurt, right? We're talking about culture, and it's the entire culture that's hurt.
Okay, great. So I'm cool. I'm cool with that. I'm down with that. All right. Okay. What does that culture need? What is their solution?
That's a great question. I would turn that back on you. What is the solution?
For
what you're asking me, what that culture needs. So what is the solution?
I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with other people using other people's stuff from their other culture if it's good that they want. I don't have a problem with that. There are legalities, but you can't really steal. You know, there's a principle. I'm a trained actor. You know, good actors borrow, great actors steal. If I go and paint the Mona Lisa, it's still coming through me. It's not, it's just going to be different. So, you know, again, can you lawyer up? Can you get paid? Can you beat Disney? Can you, whatever? So that's the legal part, the implications over there. But the cultural aspect, I think as individuals, we have to grow through. Again, there's nothing new under the sun. Do we give props to the guy who did the wheel or the drum? You know, this is the oldest tool.
We're not really talking about culture, though, when we talk about the wheel, no offense. We're not really talking about the significance of some. Do we know the culture of the person who invented the wheel? Right? When we're talking about cultural appropriation here. Right? Not just appropriation in general. We're talking about cultural appropriation.
Wait, hold on a second.
Who cares about the guy with the wheel? Who actually cares?
Just a second.
Raise your hand if
I'm
you care.
very confused as to where the drum came
guy
from.
who invented the wheel. I don't care. I don't care who invented the wheel. I
hear
did
you,
get my
Troy.
car and drive it. Thank you.
I hear you, Troy. Not sure where the drum came from, but thank you for bringing props. Dice, you had a question or you had somebody you wanted to bring in?
Yeah, I thought Troy was trying to show us his rhythm there with the drum. It is getting spicy in the chat right now. Correct me if I'm saying your name wrong, but Alyssa Cesarini brought up some really crazy history. So I know we were talking about culture. She started bringing in history of technological innovations, Alexander Graham Bell. She is going off right now. So I would love to give Alyssa a minute of time, a hot minute. Remember, you got 60 seconds to share your opinion, but share as much as you can.
Give it to us, Alyssa. What you got?
So I was just saying, in regard to what Kaysha was saying, just kind of acknowledging where things are coming from, and this dates back to the 1900s with Alexander Graham Bell. There's a million, I mean, you could Google it. Black inventors that are not being acknowledged, like in life. And historically, there's tons. I mean, it was the telephone. I believe it was a guy, his last name was Latimer, Lewis Latimer. And he invented something that's like carbon in the telephone, but it was imperative to the telephone even working. And he was the one that drafted the initial blueprint and never got credit, but Alexander Graham Bell did. And that's evident because of the racism and the times, but now we're seeing that today. So that's the problem. Why are we still seeing that today? And if you're not a white person able to acknowledge that and recognize how a black person might be experiencing the world that you walk into every day differently than you, then that's where we need to, you know, discuss where you're differentiating things. Okay.
Record time. Thank you, Alyssa. Well done. Troy, you got anything to say to that?
Was there a question?
No, anything to respond to that?
No.
Amazing. Kaysha, what you got? You still on mute.
I'm going to get a shirt that says you're on mute. It's the story of my life right now. I'm looking at the chat and I see Carrie Ann said that, to Alyssa's point, I think she was speaking to Alyssa. Carrie Ann, correct me if I'm wrong, but she said that's theft and not appropriation. To steal someone else's idea is not something cultural. So I do get your point, because I think there are some parallels there, but and I hope that you can see this, I just want to keep bringing the conversation back to culture, right? Because that's what we're really talking about here, is cultural appropriation, right? Cultural appropriation is when you take something from someone's culture and utilize only the parts of it that work to your benefit without acknowledging the culture from which it came. Right.
Yeah.
And so that to me is what I think of when I hear that I really just want to be clear that we're talking about cultural appropriation and not, what's the term I'm looking for when you steal someone's ideas?
Intellectual property.
There we go. Intellectual property theft, which is different, and I think that's why I brought up the argument about the wheel, because to me, the argument about the wheel is more about intellectual property than it is about cultural appropriation. Right? When we're talking about things that have significance to someone within the context of their culture.
Right.
Leah wants to know in the chat, she wants to know what's the proper way to acknowledge. Kaysha, I assume
That's
that correct.
Great question. I am certainly not the expert on this. I think there are multiple ways to acknowledge. I'd love to throw that back out to the group and see if there's anyone that has some great ideas around what are some good ways to acknowledge another person's culture when you're appropriating things from their culture.
I think the white dreads personal identification card that you carry in your wallet is a great start, like we talked about. No, I think that's a really good point. Who mentioned that? Leah, Heidi. Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? Like, yes, I think it's very important to say, like, yo, this idea came from this person, right? Especially when you're making money off of it. But I think that it's just not realistic to assume that, like, every person you walk by when you're wearing a kimono, you're going to tell them, like, hey, I want you to know that I'm aware this came from South Korean culture, right? Like, that's just not realistic, and that's not reasonable, right? So at what point, I think that's the thing that we're trying to find between you and Troy, right? Like, what is that point where it's like, hey, I can wear dreads as a white person and know that I didn't come up with this idea, right? Like, I'm not the first person to come up with dreads.
Well, I wear braids. I wear braids. I mean, people could say anything they want about that.
Do they look good?
Fucking dope. It looks gangster as hell. My little daughter does it for me. I love it. But I mean, it's just like people can think whatever they want, but it doesn't.
I think you can say people can think whatever they want, right? But if we take it back to you saying you wear braids, people, when you wear braids, think it's cool. If I go into a setting wearing braids, I'm ghetto.
Okay.
And that's where it becomes cultural appropriation. That's when it's problematic. When things from my culture cannot be done by me, but they can be done by other people and seen as cool and acceptable.
But I see people wearing braids everywhere.
Now, I'm almost 45 years old. I'm talking about when I was younger, when I was starting my professional career. I was not allowed 20 years ago to wear braids.
Okay.
You weren't even allowed to have cornrows in the U.S. Army until 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Right? They were not even considered appropriate.
Human beings got some growing up to do, goddammit.
Yes, we do. Amen to that, Troy. Amen to that.
Let's just evolve into the quantum leap right now. 5-MeO-DMT for everyone on the line.
Woo! Troy, you speak the language.
It doesn't exist when we're all on mushrooms. Dice, you have somebody that you wanted to bring into the conversation? I don't know if my dad heard that joke.
That's right. So Michael is trying to bring it back to hip hop. He wants to kind of touch on that Eminem topic a little bit, and I know he also seems to be a fan of the Wu-Tang. So
forever, baby. You know what time it is.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, we kind of just touched on it. Well, how would Eminem acknowledge his borrowing, to support what you're saying of, hip hop? How would he acknowledge that in a way that would be satisfactory to you, number one? And I'm going to hold you to the fire a little bit, because so far on the call, Kaysha, you seem to be the voice for cultural appropriation. So I think you have to have some idea in your mind, well, where is that line, that point of demarcation from where there's a responsibility that somebody O's.
So here's a great example. Oh, wait, I'm taking part of your 60 seconds. Keep talking, honey.
No, that's it. It was a question. So
I think to your point, and again, I started out this conversation by saying that both cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation exist, right? And that we can take aspects of cultures as long as we are giving acknowledgement to those cultures. I'm not an Eminem fan, so I don't know that much about Eminem, right? All I know is what I believe. My nephew helped to shift some of my views. He shared with me some of Eminem's history, some of his background that I didn't know, right? And he also shared with me that lyric that I just shared with you, where Eminem even acknowledges that, hey, I took this from another culture, right? I borrowed this from another culture, and I've been able to capitalize on it because I was not a part of that culture, right? But I think when I think about this, I think about, I used to live in Central America, in Guatemala. And when I lived in Guatemala, all of the traditional clothes are just absolutely beautiful. Yeah. And I felt awkward wearing them. I felt awkward because I felt like I was being a cultural appropriator, until I went and worked with some Guatemalan women at a loom and started learning the stories of what they were weaving into these artifacts. And so that when I was wearing these things and someone would say, oh, that's a beautiful dress you're wearing, I would say, oh, this is from Guatemala. This part represents the house. This represents the family. This represents the rivers, right? And so I was able to then speak to, if someone complimented what I had, I was able to then give that credit back to the culture from which it came. Now, I'm not saying that that's always going to be the case, but what I am saying is that when we begin to understand and give acknowledgement to not just, oh, this is Guatemalan, right? Because that would have been easy for me to say, oh, this is Guatemalan. No, this is Guatemalan, and here is the significance of this. These are cornrows. Here is the significance of cornrows. Did you know that African people use this to escape from slavery, to create maps, right? Then you're giving, you're paying homage. Again, as I like to constantly go back to that, you're paying homage to the culture from which it came. Also, when I think back to the time that I was in Guatemala, what I saw was people, and these were people who were just like me. They were Americans or Europeans or Australians who were coming to Guatemala, buying a ton of this beautiful fabric and then selling it. But I would see these same people hustling the people in Guatemala to get this stuff for cheap pennies, knowing that they were going to sell it for 20, 40, 100 times what they purchased for it. Whereas when I was buying things, whatever they told me the price was what I paid. What they valued it as was what I valued it as, because I knew that if I was going to sell any of these things, I was going to make way more money than them. So I think that we have to be careful about, again, bringing the economics back into the conversation. When we're buying things that are a part of another culture, a lot of times, and a lot of us are travelers, right? I'm an avid traveler. And when we go to other countries and we hustle people for things that we know we would pay 10, 20, 40 times for in our own country, that is when we also become cultural appropriators, because we're not paying attention to the economic empowerment that taking things from other people's culture robs them of.
You want to drop the mic, or should I drop it for you? Is that cool? Cool. Thank you, Kaysha. Something I just wrote in the chat is, from hearing you talk, it sounds like there's an inherent conflict between capitalism and culture. And I think that because people can come in and they can kind of commodify it, and there's a lot of C words I'm using. I like alliteration, but I think that that is part of what we're getting at here, right? That the inherent conflict between culture and capitalism, I think, is absolutely fascinating. Heidi Funk says she wants to throw something in the chat that's really going to stir up some thoughts. So go ahead, Heidi.
Yeah, thank you, because I was really struggling with what we're all understanding about appropriation. And Kaysha, the last part, you really helped me to better understand how we could acknowledge it and appreciate it, truly appreciate it. I think there's still a lot of challenges. The thing I want to bring up, though, is, so I will admit, my belief is we're all one, and I'm talking, the whole planet, all races, religions, all that. So for me, part of cultural appreciation is to blend our cultures and learn from each other. And I think it could get very challenging to figure out. In fact, because I looked up cornrows and they actually started back, they can date it back from 3000 BC, from Egyptian, yeah, okay. So for that, I mean, what you're talking about is true, and that was a different reason. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is it can get awfully confusing. And so, you know, even bringing up the economics and the commoditizing, and, you know, there's so much about power and money and politics that come in here. And I noticed somebody brought up, you know, white men and having all the power, but I know of white inventors who were poor, who never got credit for their things. So, so anyway, the last thing was, I just wanted to say, how do we really become one and use culture as a way of becoming one, in celebrating our different cultures?
Yes.
You mind if I jump into that, or you want to go into that, Troy?
Yeah, dance under the moon. Get your drum out, man. That's what we want. We want unity. All one or none. Clean air, water, soil. Equitable systems for all mankind. Get rid of that money. We don't even need to get rid of the money. Let's just invent something else, just like the Wright brothers wanted to fly like an eagle. You call that into existence, that which the heart desires, not with the mind, because the mind will get you destruction, right? What does the heart desire? We all desire peace at the cornerstone. And so use everything as a tool to bring us back to that conversation. We do need to upgrade the money, though. I'm telling you guys, I've been at this for years. I worked in the Amazon. I watched people get displaced off their lands. And, you know, the industries that you invest in, oil companies, lumber companies, all sorts of stuff, just our way of life, even Africa, all our tungsten that comes out of these things, you know, it's like our way of life is, you know, has the potential to harm other ways of life. So we have to create solutions that are beneficial for the all. Otherwise, that homelessness in your neighborhood just keeps getting, and it gets worse. We solve all of our problems now. And at the root level of that is making at least the air, the water, and the soil, you know, our main platforms, because that is what makes life hospitable. And if we don't get our shit together and agree on that, statistically, we're fucked. That's the bottom line. And so use all these conversations to come back around one, because the old divide and conquer trick is the oldest trick in the book. They don't have to deploy armies. They can just get us to fight about race or class, or, you know, this is the oldest trick in the book. So don't fall for it. How are we going to get our solutions to usher in to realize peace on earth, heaven on earth? It's here. We simply have to realize it and deprogram our mind from the conditioning, the thousands of hours, the lifetime in front of the TV, and our 12 years of industrial age school system. So this is a great time of awakening. All these conversations are utilizable for our own awakening. Gnosis, praxis, intellicus, to do, to know, to do, to become. An ever-evolving phi ratio spiral into infinity. So,
can I jump into that real quick, Troy? Because I think that
please.
You and Heidi bring up a very good point, and I want to bring it to everybody's attention, because I think we just kind of took the conversation to the next level. Is we took it outside of race for a second, and we just took it to this idea of people in power able to take the ideas of the people who don't have power, right? And now we can just step aside from this.
Don't give anyone permission to take away your power, brother. No one else has power and dominion over you.
Let's make that super clear. Ain't no way taking my power. I'm clear on that.
That's
I'm talking about,
right, brother. Let's get clear on that shit.
I'm very clear on that. Don't worry.
Right now.
Thank you for reiterating it, though. But what Heidi brought up is this interesting idea of people who have power taking away the ideas of the people without, right? Like, it's kind of like what you and Troy, you and Heidi were saying, is like, if we actually zoom out from this divisive conversation, right, of the whole black versus white, whatever, like if an alien were to come and just watch us as a species, they'd be like, wait, why are these people coming up with ideas and all those people are now well fed? Why are those people still struggling to survive while these people are using their ideas in order to capitalize? That just doesn't make sense. Not from a race level. It simply just doesn't make sense on a biological level that one entity is doing the work and another entity is eating off of it, right? And then I think that's when we get back into this idea of, you know, the conflict between capitalism and culture. Like, I personally, yeah, I'm a black guy, sure, fantastic. I'm not necessarily as concerned about the race conversation. I'm more concerned about the conversation of like, yo, make sure the people that have dope ideas are getting fed for their ideas. right? Now we're not
totally
talking about
agree.
capitalism. Now we're just talking about like the natural hierarchy of being able to feed yourself.
It's a miracle any creative idea. I lived in Hollywood for years. It's a miracle any creative idea gets done. And I've got all sorts of friends from all different walks of life and color that have gotten their movies produced and things, you know, done. So.
Right. It's kind of like what Heidi said. I think it was Heidi, but she said the idea that, you know, there are plenty of white inventors that never got their credit. Right. And I'm not here to discredit them. Like they're worthy of getting their money's due, but somebody who had influence, somebody who had money could come in and say, oh, I'll take that. That to me is ridiculous. That to me just doesn't make sense. I don't care what the race of the person is.
Totally. That was the.
I really think that when we talk about this, though, we're not just talking about a black-white issue, right?
100%.
Culture is not just something that belongs to Black people. I
Now we're
speak
getting to the good
on
stuff.
Black issues because I'm a Black woman, right? But culture is not something. I mean, you think about there was, I don't know, some hip hop artist whose album cover was him surrounded by these women who were all in hijab, but with these high-heeled boots on with their hijab and these like, I mean, it was super sexualized, right? Now, I would have been offended by that because the point of hijab is to take away that idea of sexualizing women's bodies. And yet it was being used to do the exact opposite. So it's not just something that exists in Black culture. I just happen to know more about Black culture than I know about anything else as a Black woman. So that's what I speak to. But when we talk about cultural appropriation, it happens to everyone. And Black people do it too. Look at Beyonce.
Can I play devil's advocate on that, Kaysha?
You can.
So I 100% hear you, right? And like in theory, this idea of like, okay, the hijab is meant to make modest, right? The hijab is actually meant to take away the sexuality, right? And somebody took it and they made it sexuality. I think that this might be a spicy take, but here we are on Yes And. I think if we zoom out, that can also be like like a creative interpretation, right? Like that can be interpreted as like their artistic expression of that thing. Like part of what makes that visual component so interesting is the idea of it's only been associated with this one idea, right? Like, and it's like, you know, I used to be a filmmaker, right? So if somebody takes a piece of content that I shot and I shot it very intentionally and I wrote the script a certain way, and then somebody takes that, you know, samples that, for lack of a better term, and then uses it in their own footage and completely reinterprets it, and now it has a completely different meaning. As a person who appreciates art, I wouldn't necessarily be offended by that, even though you're completely ruining the integrity of, you know, what I created the piece with. But at the same time, I understand that art is an iterative process, right?
I agree with everything you're saying, with the caveat that when you're talking about your creation of this art, are you talking about your cultural history?
Should I answer
that was a question.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and I think that's super interesting, right? Because I love that you bring up that point, because who had mentioned it before? Like you talked about this idea of braids being like rooted in slavery and giving people.
No. I never said braids were rooted in slavery. Actually, I happen to know that cornrows started in like 35, 20 BCE. They were still African though. They were started by Africans. Was my whole point about cornrows.
And they were started, and then you know a genius slave was like, oh, we can use this and use it to
but even then, even
out.
in Eritrea, when they started, which they started in that area of the world, they were used, they had meaning, right? You wore a certain type of cornrow if you were a married woman. Whereas if you were an unmarried woman, you wore a certain type of cornrow. If you were an army veteran, you wore a certain type of cornrow. If you were of a particular caste, you wore a certain type of cornrow. So they always had cultural significance, even when they started.
Right, yes. And then somebody came along, and through the process of cultural evolution, somebody reinterpreted it, kind of like what we're talking about here, right? Like eventually, for lack of a better term, they appropriated it in a way and added their own intentions with malicious intent or not, right? They came in and they added a different interpretation onto it. And as a result, this one idea then became 10 ideas, right? And for me, that's where I stand in the gray areas. I actually think that process of going from the 1 to the 10 is actually massively necessary to push us forward, right?
Where then, I guess my question is though, then where then in that do
people get paid?
I was trying to find a much more savvy way of saying that. Thanks,
You don't
Imari.
have to be savvy. If they let me be the host of this show, there is nothing that needs to be savvy about this.
Where do people get their acknowledgement then, right?
Right.
Because when we talk, and again, I think this goes back to the same conversation we've been having about around the disempowerment of people. And I think someone said it in the chat that they had a problem with when someone takes something. To me, it's only it's cultural appropriation most when it's unacceptable. When people of the culture do it, it's seen as like ghetto, or it's seen as being too cultural, right? It's not level enough. And then when other people do it, it's seen as acceptable.
100% agree with that, right? Like something that makes me cringe, especially somebody who like looks at marketing and all these things. I hate when like a big corporation will take some slang that Black people have been saying for like 2 years and then incorporate it into a new slogan. I'm like, yo, y'all, first of all, it's just corny. Like, what's happening? Join the Ralph's grocery store. It's like, come on, bro. Like that, you're just whack at that point, right? So for me, I 100% hear what you're saying, right? This idea of like, oh, when Imari says, what's happening? It's like, oh, he's so uncultured. He didn't go to college, whatever. But then as soon as I put it in like my slogan for H&M, now it's like, oh, damn, they're so edgy. They're so trendy, right? I don't think that no matter how corny it is, I don't think the cure to that is to tell H&M they can't use a slogan or whatever. But it is for us to stop judging people who do come up with the slang when they're in the process of slanging, if that makes sense, right? Like if it's now cool for like, I think when me and you had a conversation on the phone a week or two ago, it's like, oh, when a white guy pulls up and he's like blasting music, now he's like, oh, cool. Now he's like, oh, he's connected to hip hop culture. But when Imari does it, it's like, oh shit, right? Like for me, I'm not gonna tell the white guy, don't blast your music, because if it sounds amazing, if it's popping, it's popping, right? But when I pull up, you already know the music's popping, so don't like all of a sudden be like, oh, it's offensive because it's a Black guy and the music. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? It's this idea of like not telling the white person that they're wrong, but it's more so allowing the Black person or the person in minority to be as they are. And if anybody wants to drop my mic for me, that'd be fantastic. Go ahead, Kaysha, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
That's why I stopped talking, because I'm still on mute.
Right.
This chat over here is blowing up, Imari, and I am so like frantically trying to type and listen simultaneously.
I saw you going cross-eyed for a second.
Can I comment on something that someone who happens to be a friend of mine and is a Black woman said in the chat, which was around the idea that Black Americans have been wearing braids for centuries, and it was only recently that they gave credit to Africans. And then I think somebody else commented on that. And then Carrie Ann also said that since Black Panther, it's okay to be African. And this is not a conversation about race, but I think that what's really important to understand when we look at things like that is Black people in America were taught to hate being African. And that was intentional. We were taught that anything was, I remember being called an African booty scratcher when I was in elementary school. Anything remotely associated with being African was a disgrace, right? And so it's the intentional taking of someone's culture and then telling them that that culture is bad, right? So it's not like Black people just didn't want to be African. I remember telling my parents, my first trip out of the country was to Zimbabwe. And I remember telling my parents that I was going to study abroad in South Africa. And I had been taking French lessons for years at school. I was pretty fluent in French. My whole family was up in arms. Oh my God, why would you go to Africa? It's dirty, it's dangerous, everyone has AIDS. You should go to Europe. And these were Black people telling me this. So we have to be really careful when we look at Black culture in this country and the way that even Black people have been taught to hate our own culture. And then suddenly, because the dominant culture accepts it, we as Black Americans are like, oh, okay, I guess this is okay, this is acceptable, right? It's not because we're ignorant, it's because we were robbed of the right to that culture.
Very interesting point. Troy Casey, we've been saying a lot. Do you have any thoughts, my friend? I saw you feeding away a big mosquito.
Yeah. Well, yeah, my wife hates the bugs. So, I heard what she was saying. That's very interesting. My mind, it doesn't think in those terms, and I'm not in her little spiritual spacesuit. I'm only in mine. So, you know, I utilize my mental power and my time and energy to elevate as much as I possibly can. You know, I had most of my book that I just wrote is all about my walk through hell. If I stay on all the times when I think I was wronged and I never get anywhere in life, very successful right now. And a lot of that has to do with letting shit go that was holding me back, ideas, any of this stuff, and just moving forward. So, you know, people can say that that's my white privilege or that, you know, whatever, but I actually study success, and in success, it's colorblind. People are just going out and they're, you know, my mentor said, you're either growing or you're dying. And so, and if we want to accelerate and scale up our businesses, accelerate to the next level, then I can't cry about how I feel other people are interpreting me, or I can't spend my energy on interpreting them. I got to keep my own side of the street clean. So this type of thinking about what other people are up to and what people think of me, that doesn't work in my world at all. I give it zero attention. In fact, I'm wondering if we're going to get to a point where we can really solve a problem in this conversation. Otherwise, I think it's best if I just move on, because there's a whole bunch of people that don't know to go to sleep at 10 and drink water and how to clean out their body and simple stuff, how to move their body. And I can go out and teach them for sure, you know. But for most of you guys, I think we got more than enough time and energy to go out and do things that we think are going to make a huge difference in the world. And, you know, that's where my time and energy and conversation goes. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, brother. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your transparency. And thank you for being you. I thoroughly appreciate it. Honestly, genuinely, thank you. I think something you may not know about me, some of the people on this call knows about me, but I coach for a living, right? So I'm actually in a very similar space to you, Troy. And I'm actually very clear, and one of like the fundamental tenements of what I coach on is this
so let me
idea
ask
of
you a question, Imani.
Hold on, let me just finish this off, and then I'll pass it right off back to you. But this idea that you're talking about is actually massively crucial, which is this idea of like what I'm offended by takes away my power, right? Like all my traumas and all my triggers. Cool, fantastic. I'm not saying you don't have a right to be traumatized or triggered, but at the same time, that's taking away your power, right? So I'm 100% in alignment with you. It's trust me, it's not the everybody versus Troy show. I'm thoroughly on your side on that aspect,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, you how often do you let your paying clients play the victim?
Never. Absolutely fucking never. At the same time, and guess what? Both and. Yes, and, if I may. At the same time, I don't allow my clients to play victim because I know that's never a powerful space to come from. And at the same time, when my clients have great ideas or they're building companies or they're doing whatever, I demand of them to stick up for themselves and to own their shit, right? So that way somebody can't come in who maybe does have more influence than them. And I say, yo, no, I'm not going to allow a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a boss, whoever to come in and subordinate you in a way that takes away your power. And now you have to wonder where you're going to sleep, how you're going to pay your rent. Because you can, I'm 100% with you. We can empower these people all day, right? And they can have amazing ideas all day. But if we give 100 of those ideas away and don't get paid for it, fan-fucking-tastic. And now you can't fucking pay your rent. That's what we're talking about here.
Well, I'm not understanding that at all, because I lived in LA for years and years and years, and I worked with all sorts of creatives, and the color of their skin wasn't dependent on their success. Or let me rephrase that. There may be some potential in there, especially if you look at, NBC was hiring more people of color, more actors of color, more Latinos. I know a couple of my friends in Miami Beach, they got jobs right from that hiring. And so, but what are you trying to say? Because I know plenty of creatives that have all varying degrees of success.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said earlier, I think the beautiful revelation in this conversation is that it's actually not all about race. It's more about this idea of people in power versus people who are not in power, right? Like for me, I remember when I was a filmmaker, I created a series that did really fucking well, I'm talking about like millions and millions and millions of views, right? And the company took the idea, made massive amounts of success off of it. Meanwhile, I'm struggling to pay my rent. To me, that's not a race thing. It's this idea of something has an entity has power and has influence, right? And that's what we're talking about. This idea. It's like when I have an idea, dope, fantastic, do something with it, fantastic. That's how humanity and culture evolves. And give me my bread, give me my coin, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, and it also leads in, I mean, that's kind of just the way it is. You'll get pushed around by people that have more money and more capital, especially in Hollywood. That's actually the name of the business, right?
Until you call it out and do something about it.
Yeah, but how well does that work? I've seen plenty of people get squashed. So you'll get blackballed, you know? So my point is it goes back to my whole thing on upgrading our idea, our iteration around money, cash flow, what we're valuing. It's pegged to the petrodollar. It's holding us back as a species. And who's talking about that? Let's have a platform talk about this, about the evolution of currencies.
Yeah, 100%. I 100%
Liberation of all mankind, debt slave system, fiat currencies, central banking. That needs to be upgraded. Me and
you are completely in alignment on that. I think to summarize what you're saying is that capitalism is outdated, right? I think that's the point that we're making right here, is that capitalism is outdated.
But I don't see anybody talking about it. You know, the politicians, they're not going to talk about it. The politicians aren't going to talk about it, but the conscious community, I mean, we need to have serious discussions about our oil usage and our petrodollars and like what we're, you know, focused on. What's the next step? Because clearly these things are holding us back on many levels. And we don't want to be divided, the haves and the have-nots, all one or none, win, 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 win across the board. Buckminster Fuller said you don't fight the existing system, you design the future. The
100%.
Antiquated one will fall to the side.
Kaysha, what you think?
You want my honest opinion? I think we're a little off topic here. Just saying. I mean, I do think that you can segue into other conversations, but I am someone who likes to generally stay on topic. Maybe it's the educator in me. But I honestly would like to hear from, we've got lots of people on this call. I'm sure folks have something to say, and we have, maybe 9 minutes remaining. So I'd love to hear.
Mr. Dice?
Yeah.
Dice, you want to bring somebody in?
Sure. I do want to mention there is a huge topic right now of white guilt being discussed in the chat. I think that is a very interesting topic, and they brought in Trader Joe's as a prime example. Some of you may know that Trader Joe's came out with a line of, I believe it was sauces, and they called it Trader Jose's. And so that has gotten a little backlash. And I'm not sure if you guys wanted to hop on that. I believe that was Carrie's point. But yeah.
I mean, honestly, guys, honestly, am I dealing with intelligent, affluent adults? Who gives a fuck? Honestly, who gives a fuck about that shit? We got coronavirus. We got the totalitarian tiptoe happening, this election, the planet's ecosystem. Like, who gives a fuck about what fucking Trader Joe's is doing? Do you really have no life that
or
matters?
Trader Ming?
I mean, just fucking, for crying the fuck out loud. It's really that important?
I'm 100% with you, Troy. I 100% agree.
I'm gonna go make money. I'm gonna go make money getting people healthy. Honestly, guys, I don't got time for this fucking bullshit. And all this bullshit that's in the fucking cultural narrative, it's by design. Wake the fuck up. This isn't even a conversation. Get over your spilt milk. Fucking sign up as a fucking man or a woman and come and get some. It's fucking life. Don't sit around your fucking little computer screen and fucking hide out. Fucking get out there and do something. Shit needs to be done. Right?
I've got a question for you.
Crying about stupid shit. I'm not going to be a part of it. That's the bottom line. God bless.
Oh, all right. Fantastic. I had a really good question. So my question, I'll toss it into the group because I think I want to hear you guys' reflection on it. So despite what Troy may think, I actually agree with him on a lot of his points. But my question that I was going to toss to him is this wonderful future, this wonderful utopia that he'd like to create. And we're not going to get there by being upset, in my opinion. We're not going to get there by telling people that they're unintelligent or they're unknowledgeable, whatever. I don't think so, personally, right? So whatever the beautiful utopia that we all design is, kind of like even the point for me of having this conversation is like, cool, fantastic. These can be triggering conversations. These can be provoking conversations. And guess the fuck what? If you want to get wrapped up in your emotions, nobody's getting anywhere. And we'll sit on a stagnant boat. So those are my thoughts. But Kaysha, I'll toss it back to you. This is my favorite episode so far. I just want to say that.
I'm glad. I honestly don't know where all that emotion came from. I'll be perfectly honest. I actually thought we were having a very interesting dialogue and no one was being attacked in the dialogue.
I thought it was great.
I thought it was great. I didn't feel like anyone was attacking. People have disagreed with me and I'm not feeling offended in any way. I don't think that I think the purpose of this is that we all get to explore. I've learned some things through here. I've been jotting some notes of things I want to look up and ideas of my own that I may want to challenge. And I think that's the point, right? The point is that we don't, and like you were saying, Imari, to your point, we don't create this utopian society if we cannot have open, calm, honest dialogue about where we agree and disagree and really push on each other to grow.
Thank you, Kaysha. We should have Kaysha back. Christina, can you make a note of that? We can also bring Troy back if you want. I'm unattached. Cool, fantastic. So, because we only got a couple of minutes here, in order to wrap it up, I have a question for you, Kaysha. I was going to ask both of you. What's something that before tonight's conversation you hadn't yet considered, or considered to the extent that you consider it tonight?
When I stumble on a question, that's when I know I haven't considered something. And someone brought up the really great point of like, what is it that we are supposed to do, right? How is it that we, I think that I was watching the chat and people were talking about this idea of like, you know, there were Black women in the chat saying, I actually appreciate it when people take things from my culture. I feel like that is in fact them paying homage to me. And then a lot of the chat was like, what do we actually do? How do we, as a global society, because that's our reality, we are a global society. How do we, as a global society, remove the walls that we create by saying, I am of this, you are of that, and therefore you cannot be of this because you are of that? How do we grow into exactly what Troy was talking about even? How do we grow into that human society? What are the ways that we acknowledge whilst also borrowing, whilst also appropriating culture that, you know, I guess that's really it. What are the ways that we acknowledge this? Well, how do we create this utopian society that we all want, right? Troy wasn't the only one on this call who wants that. We all want that. I'd love to see money not be an issue. In fact, I spent the first 30 years of my life believing money wasn't an issue. That's why I always didn't have any. And so I think the big thing for me is, how do we move this forward in a way that acknowledges people's culture whilst also saying we are a culturally global society?
Beautiful. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, and I think some of the stuff you said, Kaysha, was what tickled my mind the most. Because personally, when I suggested this topic to Christina, I really don't like the conversation of appropriation versus appreciation. To me, it's boring, it's tired, it doesn't really go anywhere. But I wanted to see what would happen, and of course, this is what happened. But what you really tickled my mind with was this idea of the commerce aspect of it, the capitalism aspect of it. And I think that is actually, regardless of if we don't like the conversation around appropriation or not, I think that is important, right? And I don't necessarily think it is a race conversation all the time. I do think it is a people in power versus the people who are not, but who happen to have dope ideas.
And so to Troy's point, race is the way to divide us so that we're not talking 100%. About those people who have the power.
Right. You got 2 thumbs up from Heidi Funk.
Thank
you. Amazing. Well, this was fun. Thank you all so much for joining and being a part of this experience with me. I'm going to toss it real quick to Dice and Kaysha for any last things that the people in the chat should know about you or your life before we move forward.
Dice, you first.
Okay, sure. Rock, paper, scissors. Quick reminder that there's a Kumo party after this. And yeah, I am a dungeon master online. So I play Dungeons and Dragons, RPGs. I get people outside of where they are, outside of their reality. And I create really cool spaces virtually for people to experience as a group. So that's what I do. And maybe I'll see you guys around.
Can you explain to us what a Kumo party is?
Yeah, that one's a little more in Christina's realm, but it is a virtual party where people can hang out in a virtual space, basically.
You want me to jump into that, Dice? I can knock that out. Cool. So for everybody who's new to Yes and, after we finish this conversation, we move into a thing called Kumo Space. And Kumo Space is basically a more interactive version of this. Like, imagine everybody has like a little character, a little Abby, and you can move it around the room. And when you go around the room, you can talk to the people in the room. So if you saw Idris had a thought tonight and you really want to talk to him, you can move your little Abby over to him and have a conversation with him. It's actually super cool. It's basically like it's basically a video game version of what we're doing right here. It's pretty fantastic. Yeah, it's basically the after party, but no strippers. So as far
I don't know, I'm feeling a little frisky today.
Everybody's feeling kind of fired up, so who knows what's gonna happen at the after party.
Exactly.
And then I would say last notes for me is, for me, this went absolutely perfect. To me, this was absolutely beautiful. Thank you all, from Kaysha all the way to Christina to Dice to everybody, Heidi, everybody who had thoughts to offer into the space. I think that we tonight saw an example of what interesting conversation looks like and how we can iterate to make them more effective, and how we are all contributing to that process. For me, as a professional life coach now, I deeply value the power of conversation. Like, for me, all I do all day is sit in front of a Zoom screen, and I use conversation to change people's lives and to change their perspectives and say the thing in a certain way that makes them click and see the world in a new reality. So for me, this thing that we're all doing right here, this is us evolving. This is us doing the process of becoming human. So thank you for engaging in it with me. It's such a fun dance. And off of that, I have a group coaching program, and I bring along a lot of high profile guests to coach alongside me. Kenzie, who's snapping down there, she's one of the students in that. We bring on a lot of high profile guests, people who have had success in various areas, whether they're multimillionaires or they're transformational coaches. I bring them on and we go through a 7-week journey where we coach the hell out of people so they can walk out of that 7 weeks in his new evolved 2.0s. Yeah. So if anybody wants more information on that, hit me up, or Kenzie, because she's my best cheerleader. Christina Weber, I'll pass it to you. You can say all the things that make people feel good. Go ahead.
What a dynamic conversation today. It's always, by the way, so interesting when you hand it over to me and then my face becomes like the big screen. And then it like takes a moment.
Very intimidating, isn't it? Yeah.
Recalibrate. So a couple of things. First off, I know there's some inquiries happening in the chat about the Kumo space, the after party. And there's a link in the chat. I'll drop the link in there right now again. And following this, as we close this out, we'll play some music to close it out, and then you can click that link. And I private message it to Kaysha. Let me send it to everybody. So I'm dropping it in there now. And it's a cool spot to come check out. You have to access it from a computer. It's in beta. A lot of us, these new technologies are currently in beta right now. And you do have a little avatar, and you can walk around this room and we can join in a group discussion or conversation, or you can even walk off and you can have a one-on-one conversation with somebody else who's here in this space. So come check it out. It's just a cool thing to stay. You want to stay for a little bit, stay for a little bit, just peek in, walk around. That's cool. If you have elsewhere to be, and if not, stay and chill and make connection. Also, you know, I did invite, or we did invite people to change their name tags to their Instagram is included here. So feel free to like connect with each other. That's, you know, deepen as we move through this iteration of now what we are after the coronavirus has come into our existence. And you know, we really are hanging on a hat that we're a network and interactive entertainment for those who desire healthy relationships. So if you're in for healthy relationships, come hang out with us. It doesn't matter if you're single or if you're in a relationship, if you're dating, whatever it may be, if you want a healthy relationship, let's do it together and be in a community of people who want that. Up and coming on WeDeepen, we have, just going to tell you a couple quick events coming up. First off, tomorrow evening, Thursday, is Unleash at 5 Pacific Standard Time and 8 Eastern Standard Time, because now the fun thing about this is we first started in Los Angeles and now I'm here with you guys in Maryland. And so we're from like east to west coast of jumping into these conversations. It's so nice to even see Los Angeles people, New York City people, all of us on this call together, some from Florida and such. So way to like, you know, really even diversify from a geographical location that we now have the opportunity to do through these experiences. So tomorrow, and Michael just said he's in Philadelphia, so we've got Philadelphia in the house too. Tomorrow, again, Unleash, come dance. Yadi Iksa is guiding a transformational dance journey, and there's some guests. They're going to do some breath work, and it's a fun experience to be in your full expression of movement and dance. So that's tomorrow evening. Sunday night is Nightcap Ninja at 9:30. David, I know who's here, has been a fan coming week after week to that experience, bringing his family in. And Nadine guides you through Nightcap Ninja, which it guides you into a restful night's sleep, happens every Sunday evening. Ignite is a new workout. So we actually have a workout. It's like a hot, popular workout by Jolene. Ignite, it's called a shamanistic fitness workout. So you can come and flex your faith muscles. And that's happening on Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, or 2 in the afternoon if you're on the East Coast. And then just 2 other events I'm going to tell you about. What's interesting, Troy was talking about men's work, and I have been starting, you know, these conversations or what has, you know, been coming up around, you know, one question that maybe I threw out, Imari and I, by the way, if you guys ever have a question to suggest to us, feel free to shoot it over. I suggested this question, are women really more evolved than men? So I think it'd be a fun one to unwrap.
It's a little biased, but.
But through that conversation came from, because I had posted an article from Harper's Bazaar on my Facebook that was pondering the question, do men really have friends, and are women taking the burden of men not having friends? I know Melissa shared that her husband has a ton of friends. So that there's a men's group happening on Tuesday evening. Mastering Your Alchemy happens every other Tuesday. So come join if you're a man, be in the energy of masculine. I haven't been myself, but I'm sure we hear wonderful feedback. And then the last one I'm going to tell you about before we jump to the next Yes Then that we definitely want to invite you to is next Wednesday at an hour later, so we start that one at 6 and 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, is Mind Sports. And next week we have 2 teams battling. I'm going to say battling, and it's a debate because it's actually more for like your own internal debate that you're having, is like, we're going to debate polyamory versus monogamy. So come join us for that discussion. It's already been pretty popular or pretty interesting during sirens. Annapolis, Maryland has some crazy things happening outside. But the conversation, it's already been pretty interesting in the pre-production planning. So I have a feeling that next week's Mind Sports is going to be rather interesting. And then we're back here. Yes End happens the last Wednesday monthly. That gives us to September. If anyone has that date, because I actually did not write that date down, but it's the last Wednesday of September. We're back for Yes End. We haven't confirmed the question. So again, if you have a question that you would like us to unpack, please feel free to reach out and suggest it. I'm still going to push for that question of like, are women more evolved than men? Imari, I'm sure I can already see his pushback on it. But thanks everyone for coming out. Again, the link I'm dropping in here once again, and let's maybe Dice can throw some music on. And Imari, amazing dialogue. Thank you for like guiding this conversation. And Kaysha, thank you for showing up. It was so much fun to collaborate and play with you. And Troy, although he's not here anymore, it was really dynamic to have Troy, I thought, as well.
Oh
I
yeah,
agree with all of that.
fantastic. Yeah, thank you all for participating. This has definitely been the highlight of my day. So thank you for just being
I
amazing
want
human
to just
beings.
add one thing that is so not related to this conversation, but somewhat, which is that my 14-year-old son, who's at my parents' house on the East Coast right now, I'm in LA, was on this call, and I totally forgot he was here. He dropped off the call and sent me this horrible message about how inappropriate I was being when I made the comment about feeling frisky. He immediately left.
Next time
Poor
on Yes
thing.
And.
Is your mom too frisky?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you, especially Kaysha, especially Christina. Thank you, Dice. Thank you, David Dickinson. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Taylor. Fantastic, wonderful. Appreciate everybody. Love y'all. Thank you for being exemplary human beings. Good night.